Hey, thanks for joining me. This is part 3 of The Wealth of the Poor. You know, I had the privilege some years back of doing a pilgrimage in Brazil. It was outside the city of Fortaleza, which at the time was considered to be the 4th most violent city in the world. And so we were out in the country and we walked about 20 miles a day, and the evenings we would stay in the homes of the poor. And not just that, we had an opportunity to eat with them, and we would do some type of community service where we'd actually go and either preach in the streets or in a local church or right on the porch of our host home. And then we would meet together as a group to talk about the things we were learning and how God was speaking to us. It was a really wonderful time. But being in Brazil, a lot of my fellow pilgrims spoke only Portuguese, and a handful spoke English and Portuguese. So I was definitely the outsider, not knowing a word of Portuguese except for obrigado, which is thank you. And I met a young man, and he was about 10 years old, an orphan. His name was Gabriel. And Gabriel could tell right away I was a foreigner and I couldn't speak his language. And he took it upon himself to help me. And he would come to me, and if he wanted to ask me if I wanted something to eat, he'd make the gesture with his hands in his mouth and he'd say the Portuguese word for eat. And I would try as best I could to repeat that word. Doing the same thing with, do you need a drink? And all different types of things, making gestures and trying to teach me Portuguese. Well, that evening, when we slept at the homes of the poor, oftentimes what we did is strung up hammocks, whether that was indoors or out under the stars or on the porch. A lot of Brazilians sleep in hammocks, and so there tends to be hooks all over the grounds where you could do that, except of course you have to tie off in trees. And I was sleeping out under the trees, and I had not fallen asleep. And Gabriel was quite concerned with me, and he came to check up on me, and I could tell he was worried and wanted to know in so many words why I couldn't sleep. And I assured him as best I could that I was okay. Well, next morning, it was time to begin our walk again. Before we left, I did a little tour of their little pen that had a chicken and I think a goat. And when they're done giving us a tour, I said, obrigado. And little Gabriel, his smile just broke out, and he told the others that were with me that he taught me that word. And he was so proud. But when I left, Gabriel was nowhere to be found. I couldn't find him. I wanted to say goodbye, and he was nowhere to be found. So I had a lot of walking to do, and we would walk to around lunchtime, and then we'd take about an hour break. And when I stopped for lunch, one of my fellow pilgrims caught up with me and said, hey, Gabriel wanted you to have something. And he took out a little stone that had crystals on it. This was one of Gabriel's prize possessions. And he wanted me to have that. And I said I couldn't find him when I left. And my fellow pilgrim told me he went inside to cry. And broke my heart, you know. But I reflected a lot on Gabriel and how he was an orphan and vulnerable. And he could see that I was vulnerable, not being able to speak his language. And the richness of his life was the willingness to enter my vulnerability. And here I am, you know, the wealthy American compared to him, the one who's privileged enough to travel to his country and do this pilgrimage. And he felt I was vulnerable, and he wanted to help me. And I have just seen this in the poor all around the world, that even in desperation, they look and they can identify when someone is in need, and they are some of the most giving people in the world. So thank God for the Gabriels of the world They're wealthy in ways many of us are not. God bless you. I'll see you again real soon.